Today's daf we're going to be learning is Bava, Kamma daf Tzadi Gimel. Today's daf, it's the daf for Shabbat. Today's daf is sponsored by Debbie Pine and Mark Orenshine in loving memory of Mark's mother, Sandy Orenshine. Lata Rachel Bat David V'Malka on her 5th year at site. So we're going to get started today with the 16th and final question that Rava asks Raba bar Meri. Amar Rava, and then we're going to go back to the very first one. Amar Rava bar Meri. Minna hamilta d'amri yinashe. Batar mari nichse tzive meshoch. I should read that a little better. Batar mari nichse, after a person who has a lot of money, tzive meshoch. You should carry his wood. Okay, what does this mean? Either it means if there's a wealthy man, you should help them. You should help the man a little bit, or it possibly means you should partner with him. It's just a way of saying carry his wood, meaning go into business with him. It'll be good for you. Okay, either which way, it's going to be a positive thing for you. Where do we know this? Because Lot connected himself with Avram, it's not like he did so much for him, but because he was with him, that already gave him, in the end, he ended up with a lot of wealth. Amar Rav Chanan. Now we're going to go back to the very first one. Okay, let's go back for a minute. What was the very first one? The very first one was about, how do we know that kolam mevakesh rachamim al chavero? If you ask for mercy for someone else, and as you pray for somebody else and you yourself need the same thing, you will get answered first. So now they do a flip of this. Amar Rav Chanan, hamosir din al chavero hu ne'enash tchila. If you are mosir din, what does this mean? This seems to mean if you bring your judgment to God, instead of going to a court, which is the best way to deal with some issue you're having, you go straight to God and you complain to God. This is like when you go to complain to the principal about something that you should first go to the teacher about, and then you should go to the head of the department, and then you should go, right? You don't go straight to the top, okay? You should deal with it in the courts first, deal with it in a way that you can handle it. Don't go to God right away, okay? It could be either because, that's kind of the top, or because, it's not appropriate to bring it in front of God. First, try to work things out. And where do you work things out? In a court. How do we know this? And then if you do that, now, the assumption here is if there's two people, well, everybody probably did something wrong. So if you're the one who starts complaining to them to God, you're the one who's going to get punished first. Remember, Sarah complains to Avram, and then she says about Hagar, and then she says, Yishpot Hashem b'ni u'bincha. God will judge between the two of us. And she brought her issue straight to God. Not like there was a court for her to deal with otherwise, but she did bring it straight to God. The Gemara doesn't yet talk about the court underneath, okay? But that's the assumption, and we'll see that from later on. And now, how do we know that she was punished? He buries her, basically. He mourns for her because she died many, many years before him. But this is only if there is a court in the land. If there is no court in the land, then you don't get punished for that. In other words, if there's nowhere to go, then you can bring it to God. I'm a Rabbi Yitzchak. If somebody complains about somebody else, the one who complains is actually going to get punished more than the one who was complained about. Tanya Namihachi, and here's a braita to support. Both of them are going to get punished. But the one who calls out and complains is going to be punished more than the one who was attacked, basically, by the other. So now, where do we get this from? Rashi tells us we get it from a pasuk. It's talking about an orphan. There's always those three that go together, the orphan, the convert, and the widow, that are often on the outs. And it says, if and that's if they cry out and complain to me about something you've done to them, I will be angry and I will kill you, in the plural. Who's the you in the plural? Both the one who complained, right? It's interesting because the pasuk seems to be saying we have to protect the ger yatom and almana, but the drasha is saying they actually are going to get punished first because they complained. And they'll get punished more. But Amar Rabbi Yitzchak, don't take so unseriously. In other words, the curse of a regular person, that might be a light curse, don't say, oh, that's nothing. It's just a regular person cursing me, and don't take it too seriously. Avimelech cursed Sarah, and it was fulfilled in her children. What was the curse? Okay, this is a bit of a strange pasuk. This pasuk, it says, he's saying to her, I'm angry at you, Right? I see now she's pregnant. I'm sorry, I'm reading totally the wrong pasuk here. Okay, let's start again. I gave 1,000 kesef to your brother. Okay, it sounds actually like it's a good thing in the pasuk. Okay, it's sounding like it's going to, I'm giving you a lot of money, and the simple reading, the way they understand the pasuk is, I'm giving you money to go home with, because otherwise it's going to look like I took you, I did what I wanted with you, and then I left you. But the fact that I'm returning because I was done with you and I didn't really care anymore, I had done what I needed. And that would just, that would look one way. But I'm going to show that this all came about on account of a miracle of God, and that God showed me, that I had made a mistake. And that's why I'm returning you in this way with a lot of money, so that people understand, because usually you don't return a woman that you stole or took and raped or whatever in a very positive way, and you send her back with money. So that will make everybody realize something else is going on. But the way that Rasha is reading it, sut einayim is your eyes will be covered. In other words, somebody will be blind. And already figure out how this is going to be fulfilled in Sarah's children. Right? Amarla, because you covered it up for me and didn't tell me that she was your wife. Right? He was your husband. It says to Sarah, you weren't honest with me, and you caused me this pain. You will have children who are blind. And this happened, fulfilled in her children. Remember, Yitzchak goes blind at the end of his life. That's the whole intro to the whole blessing, when he gives the wrong blessing to the wrong child. Amar Rabbi Yaval, Lo'olam yehadam min hanirdafim, last statement for this section. Lo'olam yehadam min hanirdafim v'lo min harodfim. Better to be preyed upon or chased than to be the one doing the chasing. She'en lecha nirdaf ba'ofot, yoter mitolim b'nei yonah, the ones who are the most attacked among the birds, right? The ones who the predators get at is the torim and the b'nei yonah. Okay, these are the turtle doves and the pigeons and the turtle doves. And they're the ones who we always bring as sacrifices. So there you have it, how important it is, how it's better to be the one who's being chased than the one who's doing the chasing. Okay, that's the end of that section, and now we're going back to our Gemara. So now we're back to the Mishnah. We had two different cases. If someone says, blind my eye, even amanat liftol, even if you say, I will exempt you, still you're liable. But if someone says, break my vessels, then you have to pay, right? So, I'm sorry, I said it wrong. Sorry, why am I getting confused by this? Let's just go back. Right? Both cases you're going to be liable. If you say tear my clothing or break my cod, you're going to have to pay. But if the person says, but I'll exempt you, then actually we assume they're being serious, that they really will exempt. But if they say it about their body, we don't take them seriously, and we make you pay anyway. So now we have to understand what's the difference between these cases. And we actually saw this whole sugya way back in the beginning of the Masechet. Amalei Rav Asi bar Kamma le Rav. Mishna reisha u'mishna seifa. Amalei reisha lefi she'en adam mochel al rashei avachim. We assume that people don't allow me just to cut off their arms. So therefore, if they said it, they didn't really mean it, and therefore I'm going to be liable. Even if they said, oh yeah, and sure, I'll exempt you. They obviously didn't mean that seriously. Amalei, right? And that's the difference between people are mochel on their clothes. They don't care. Okay, tear my shirt. What's the difference? You'll pay me back. And if you say, and I don't care if you pay me back, so you don't really care either. Amalei, v'chi adam mochel atzaro. Wait a minute. This sounds like people will not, right? If you cut off my arm, I will not be mochel you about it, right? I will not allow that to happen. But what? You think that Adam is mochel on pain? People are willing to suffer pain? And now we're going to show, we just made an assumption that people don't allow someone to break their arm, really. They don't really mean it when they say it. So, but they would on pain? No, there's no reason to distinguish. And look at the following braitot. We're going to have a contradiction. And there's a study guide for today, starting with this section. Ditanya, hikani ptsaeni, hakeni, hit me, ptsaeni, wound me. almanat liftor. Now, this seems to be not necessarily cutting off an arm, but hurting me and causing an injury, a bruise. If I say almanat liftol, and I will exempt you, patur, I'm exempt. So now we have a problem. This seems to contradict our Mishnah. We're assuming right now that tzal and cutting off limbs are really one and the same. Ishtik, so in fact, he was silent. He didn't have a way to answer. In other words, this Rav Asi bar Kamma answered Rava. That's the reason in our Mishnah. And then Rava said back to him, but that doesn't seem to match this other braita. Amar midish mi'alach baha. So then he says back to him, well, maybe you know something about this. Amar le. So Rava says, yeah, in fact, I do. Hachi amar Rav Sheshet mishum b'gam mishpacha. Now, the issue, okay, what's the b'gam mishpacha? We're going to basically say, if there's pain, that's not going to cause any embarrassment to your family. But if you have no leg or you have no arm, that's already a humiliation for the family. Now, this could mean a bunch of different things. This could mean, well, maybe you're willing to forego the payment of the damages, but your family is not willing to forego their, and the payment maybe that you're actually liable to pay in our Mishnah is the p'gam mishpacha. Or perhaps because there's humiliation to your family, you're not willing to forego the payment of the pain, of the damages. But when it comes to pain, since there is no p'gam mishpacha, therefore you are willing. So that's how we resolve this. Itmar. And in fact, there's a machloket about this. Rabbi Yashai Amar Mishum p'gam mishpacha. Okay, he explains just like Rav Sheshet does, that the reason in our Mishnah is because of p'gam mishpacha, because not having an arm really causes a whole, the way people look at your family is going to be different. Rava Amar Mishum she'ena gam ochela rashay varim shelo. But Rava says the original, and some people say, by the way, the Rava from before is not really Rava, right? I'm going to go back and check this now. They say I'm assuming, they say it's Rav, some people say. And then, right, which makes sense because Rav was the one who ends up answering the question. It doesn't make sense it's Rava because Rava in the end is going to say that's nothing to do with p'gam mishpacha. He goes back and says, Mishum she'en adam ochel rashay varim shelo. And he would have to say, would distinguish between the two cases in the sense that Rashay Varim, people are not willing to give up on, but pain, perhaps they would be. That's two different things, and therefore that's how Rava looks at it. Rabbi Yochanan Amar, this is possibly a third answer. There's a lot of different ways to understand if Rabbi Yochanan is coming with something new, if this is his reading of the Mishnah, if he's saying it really all depends, and we'll see right now. I'll kind of suggest at least one or two suggestions. Rabbi Yochanan Amar, yesh hen shu kalav, yesh lav shu kehen. Says, I always quote my mother as saying this, right? It all depends on your tone of voice and how you say it. So you could say yes, which really means no, because what you really mean yes. And you could say no, which means no, which really means yes. Okay, so let's see in the braita, we're going to read it right now explicitly. The braita Tanya Namihachi says, like Rabbi Yochanan, Hakeni Sa'eni, if I say go hit me or injure me, and you say, Almanat liftor, will I be exempt if I do that? And I say, Hain, yes, but I say it with a question mark. Yes? What do you think? Of course not. Hare yeshen chukalav. That's a yes, which really means no. Chad ksuti, if I say tear my clothes, almanat liftol, that I should be exempted. Sorry. And then you say, am I going to be exempt? And then I say, amar lo, lav, no, like no. What I really mean is, like, of course, yes. Hare lav shukain. When I said no, what I meant is, of course, yes. Why did you think I told you to rip my clothing? So one way of understanding this is it all depends on how you said it. So the Mishnah can be read as if you answered yes with a question mark or no with a question mark, you really meant the reverse. Or it could mean that even if you were to say yes or no here, we're going to assume what you must have meant was you were being sarcastic and you didn't really mean it, because who in their right mind would do that? And maybe that's how he reads the Mishnah. So it's a little tough to know whether he's saying, if you said it with a question mark, it could mean the opposite, or anytime you say it in this context, we assume you mean the opposite, because that would be what we would normally assume a normal person would be saying in this situation. Okay, now we have, okay, that's the end of that section. Now we move to Shaberet Kadi Chad Tzuti Chaya. So we started with this issue of what's the difference between the Reisha and the Seifa, the Smat Eni, and then the Krat Tzuti. We established that, well, that's because people aren't mochel on the Rashay Varim. We compared that to a different braita with the issue of Sa'al and Ke'ev. We either said, because there's no P'gam Mishpacha, we're going to differentiate, where there we would assume you could be mochel in the pain case, or maybe just pain is different from eyes. That was, Rava's explanation. Or we have Rabbi Yochanan, who basically said the difference between the ratio and the sefer could be also your tone of voice and what we assume you meant by it. Again, whether he really is saying something new or not is a debate. Now we move on. We're now going to bring another contradiction. Okay, contradiction between our Mishnah and another source. The source is talking about ki ten adam kesef o kelim, if somebody gives you money or vessels, lishmor v'lo la'abed. If they told you watch them, then you're liable. If they told you lose them, then you're not reliable. Lishmor v'lo l'kla. Okay, they tell you to watch them, but they tell you to tear them. If they tell you to tear them, you're not liable. Lishmor v'lo l'chalek la'aniyim. They tell you to watch them, then you're liable. Something happens to them. If you tell them to hold them for poor people, then they're kind of ownerless because the original owner doesn't own them, so you're not liable if something happens. And if you lose them, let's say, so the owner can't say they're mine because you said give them to poor people. There's no poor people who could come and say it's mine because you haven't decided which poor people you're going to give it to yet. So it doesn't have an owner really, so you won't actually be liable. That's a totally different thing. But now what's the problem here? The problem is that according to this, if they gave it to you to destroy, right, then you're not a shomer, really, okay, which means you wouldn't be liable. So if they said tear it, it sounds like you won't be liable. And what did our Mishnah say? If you tell someone to tear it, they're liable unless you say, I'm going to exempt you. But if you don't say I'm going to exempt you, you meant tear it and pay me the money for it. This sounds like you're not going to be responsible. So amalav huna lo kashya hada atal yade ha delo atal yade. Okay, so now we're going to say the following. When it says break it and you're going to be liable, that's when first they gave it to you to watch, and then they told you to tear it. Well, at that point, since you started as a shomer, you're liable. And then that changes the Mishnah. The second source where it said, if they give it to you to tear, you're not liable, that's when they give it you right away and say, tear my item. And then you're not a shomer at all, you're not liable. I'm really Rava. Lishmor da'ata liyade mashma. But wait, you're going to say that Lishmor and Lola Abed is a case where they gave it to you and right away, before they even gave it to you, said, I want you to tear it. But the pasuk there says, if you give someone kesef or kilim, first you give them the item, and then you tell them either Lishmor, or the pasuk's going to say, right, but not if they told you La Abed. So that seems to be you got the item first. So that's not a good answer, what we just said. So El Amaraba, Hava Hada Ataliyade. Both got your hands. It's just for Lokasha. Hada Ataliyade B'Torat Shmira. The first one got your hand as an item you were meant to watch. That's our Mishnah. And that you got the item to watch, and then you were told, oh, by the way, you could tear it. Well, then you're going to be liable. But this one, they gave it to you, and then after they gave it to you, they said, by the way, you want to know why I'm giving this to you? I'm giving it to you to tear, not to watch. That's what it means, lishmor velo likla. Now we're just going to have a story with this one in the chapter, and this has to do with the last part of that braita, which really didn't have to do with our topic, which is lishmor velo latet laniyim, which sounds like if something happens with tzedakah money, you're not liable. So there was a wallet of charity money, a bag of charity money that was given to someone to watch. Afkadei Rav Yosef here, it was in Pumbedita. Then Afkadei Rav Yosef Kabehu Gafra, Rav Yosef gave it to a particular person to watch. Pashabe, he didn't take care of it properly. He didn't leave it in a very safe place. Atu Ganve Gamvua, came robbers and they stole it. Chive Rav Yosef, and Rav Yosef made him liable. Now this goes against what we just said. Doesn't it say you're only liable about shmirah, not if they gave it to you to give to poor people? The people of Pumbedita get a regular amount of money from the charity money, and therefore it's as if it's theirs. Okay, let's say these 10 people get charity every day, X amount of charity or X amount a week. That means as soon as you got the money to watch, it was already as if it was divided up by those 10 people, and therefore it has owners, and therefore you're liable for it, as opposed to before where we said it was really ownerless. And with that, Hadran alach machovel, finish this chapter up, a bit of a ending with number one, finishing up all those interesting drashot and all sorts of kind of statements that started with that question of Rava to Rava bar Meri. We finished the 16th question. We went back to talk about a counter to the first one about if you pray for someone and they'll pray for you, but if you turn someone in, then you'll be actually punished first. And then we had a whole bunch of things kind of in that direction of complaining about other people and also not taking seriously curses that people curse you, and you should always be chased and not the one chasing, etc. Then we got to figuring out the difference between someone who's told, injure me, versus someone who's told, damage my property, and what the differences are between them. And we dealt with some contradictions that we saw between sources. Now we're going to start Hagozel Eitzim. So we're back to theft, okay? But this time not Geneva. We're going to talk about Arava Chadisha and all that. But we're going to talk about Gzela, about theft. This is usually frontal. Okay, you see the thief. Okay, therefore you don't have all that capital payment and other stuff. And we're going to talk, the first topic is really going to be about shinui. Okay, we're going to say when, we already started talking about this issue in the 7th chapter, about if you steal something and then change it, and that's going to be our main topic for today, then you acquire the item as the thief. And what does it really mean you acquire the item? It means you have to pay the value of the item the way it was. Okay, if there's a change, you pay the value of what it was at the time of theft. So Hagozel Eitzim Basan Kelim, you stole wood and you turned it into a vessel. That's a change. Semer Vasam Gadim, you took wool and you turned it into clothing. Mishalem Kshara Gzela, so you have to pay the value of the item of what it was when you stole it. Gazal Para Me'uberet, you stole a para while she was pregnant. V'yalda. Now here, the change, it's a different kind of change. The change just happens, not because of anything you do. It's a more natural change, but it is a change. Rachel Ti'una Ugazaza, you stole a sheep that was full of wool. And, you cut off the wool and now it has less wool on it. Mishalem Dmei Para Homedet Leleid, you pay the value of the para who's pregnant. And you pay Dmei Rachel Homedet Legazez, you pay a full sheep that was full of shearings that were ready to be sheared, full of wool that was ready to be sheared. So basically, you're going to pay again at the moment. Now, there's a difference between the para me'uberet, where the animal is born on its own and the change happens on the animal's doing, not your doing, whereas the Rachel, you sheared and you caused the change. Either which way, it doesn't matter. It's a change. Gazal para v'nitabra etzlo v'yalda. You stole the para when it wasn't pregnant. Then it became pregnant by you and had offspring. Rachel v'nitana etzlo gazazah. You stole a sheep and it didn't have any wool on it. V'nitana etzlo gazazah, and then it grew and you sheared it. Mishalem k'shadek selah. Again, the principle being, you pay the way it was, not pregnant and not full of shearings. Zehakla, and this is the rule. Kol hagazlanim mishalemim k'shadek selah. Okay, any gazlan. Now you have to add the words who made a change. It's weird, it doesn't say this in the Mishnah. You pay from the time that you stole it, at its value then. Okay, what does this add? We're going to get to later in the Gemara. Why do they have to add that line? So now let's start with inference from the first law in this Mishnah. Amre etzim vasan kelim in, shifan lo. Seems like it's wood that you took and made a vessel out of, but not if you just sanded it down. Semer vasan begadim in libnan lo. If you took wool and turned it into clothing, yes, you'd be liable. That would be a shinui, but just cleaning it, no. This makes an assumption, which we're going to change soon, and that's why I want to be very clear about this, that sanding something down or whitening it is actually less change than making a vessel out of it and making a clothing out of it, which sounds like it is less of a change, but soon we're going to change that. Or mini, and this contradicts the following source. Gazal Eitzim, there's a lot of charts. Today's sheet is all charts. That'll help you organize what's going on here. Gazal Eitzim v'shifan, you stole. Now, here's exactly what we just said. If you stole wood and just sanded it down, avanim v'sititan, you took stones and you also sanded it down, right? Made them smooth. Semer v'libnan, you took wool and you whitened it. Pishtam v'dikau, you took flax and you cleaned it. Mishalem k'shadek zelah. That's also a change, and you pay based on what it was before it was cleaned, before it was sanded, before it was all. So that seems to go against this inference we just made from our Mishnah. So Amar Abai. Abai is going to basically say your inference is wrong, and actually it's the reverse. Tana Didan, our Mishnah, Katani Shinui de Rabbanan, de Hadran. All the Shinuyim, the changes in our Mishnah, were actually changes that can go back to what they were originally. If you take wood and make it into a vessel without sanding it down, so you can undo it and it could be back to that piece of wood. If you sew an article of clothing with wool, you can undo all the stitches and go back to having wool. It's actually a more minor change. That's only a change that has relevance on a rabbinic level. On a Torah level, that wouldn't really be called change. And then maybe you pay its value now and not the value at the time of the theft. So But in the end, right, we're going to hold even that shinui is going to mean it's owned by you. Shinui deoraita. Now, instead of saying, and that infers not the other cases, no, and all the more so the other cases. If you whiten it, you can't undo the whitening anymore. If you sand it, you can't unsand it. Those are permanent changes. That's deoraita, and those are the ones mentioned in the braita. So it doesn't mean there's a contradiction between the inference from our Mishna and the other braita, because our Mishna was talking about one case. It wasn't inferring anything about the other case. And the other braita is talking about a different case. And they're just two different cases. One is talking about the braita level, and one is talking about the Rabbanit changes. Eitzim, and now we're going to explain. Okay, Eitzim basan kelim be'eitzim meshufim umaynihu nisarim. When it talked about in our Mishnah, eitzim that you turned into kelim, it was talking about eitzim that were already, the wood was already ready to make a vessel out of it, and that's why the change can go back, because it's just like wood pieces that you just stuck together. Because if you wanted, you could just undo it. And this is just a review of what I said, is b'tsemer tavoy. It's already spun, and and therefore you can just undo the stitches, and it'll be back at what it was. If you want, you could just undo it. And our Mishnah meant, forget if you're going to make an inference, the inference is going to be, and all the more so, if it was a change on a Torah level, then of course the thief would only pay, right, would acquire the item in the sense that they would only pay back to the time of the theft, the price that it was then. Vitana bara, and the other Tana, again, this is just reviewing what I said. The Tana of the braita, shinui deoraita katani, v'shinui derabbanan lo katani, was only mentioning a change on a deoraita level. It wasn't mentioning our cases. Rav Ashi Amar, a different answer. That's the first answer to the contradiction between the two. Now we're going to have a second answer. Tana didan nami shinui deoraita katani. Both of them are talking about change on a Torah level. In which case, so what would you have to say? Eitzim vasan kelim buchani dahainu shifan. It would have to be a case where you turned the wood into a pestle, and you'd have to shave down the wood to get it to the right shape. That would be a case where it would be both, right? The change would not only be turning it into a vessel, but also sanding it. And then he agrees with Abai that you can't infer from our Mishnah that shifan lo. No, shifan would be the same. If you sanded it, it would also be a problem, because this is a case where you sanded it. Semer basam begadim nimte dahainu shinui delo hadar. Okay, it would also be a case where it's you also kind of you whitened it, right? Nimte, remember now what nimte, right? Nimte is you created pieces of felt. It's not that you sewed stitches that you could undo. You do pieces of felt. You first sand it. You first clean it, comb it, and then you use a mixture of heat and moisture, and you basically turn it into a different item, which can't be undone. So both of those cases would be more of a shinui that doesn't change, and then both are actually talking, both the Mishna and the braita are actually talking about the same thing. So that resolves that contradiction. But now we're going to raise another contradiction. The libun mihavi shinui. Now the assumption of everything we just said is that whitening it, both from what was clear in the other braita and the way we resolved the contradiction, was that whitening it and cleaning it, right? Cleaning, which is whitening, would be a shinui. But that's going to contradict another source, which is a Mishnah in Reshit Hagez, which is when you bring the first wool, reminu. You're supposed to bring 5 rechelim worth of wool. Okay, that's the amount that is required. From that amount, you have to give an amount to the Kohen. Okay, that's your minimum amount. If you do any less than that, you don't have to give to the Kohen. Otherwise, you have to give a certain portion to the Kohen. So now it says, lo ispik litnolo ad shetzva'o patul. What if you didn't manage to give to the Kohen, and then already you colored the wool? Okay, forget about the minimum amount. We're going to get to that later. But if you didn't even, you forgot to give to the Kohen, let's say, and then you already changed it, well, then you're exempt. Now, how did you change it? You colored it. Libno v'lotzva'o. If you whitened it, but didn't color it, chayat, then you're obligated, because that's not a shinui. What do you see here? Libun is not a shinui. So I'm Rabbi Lokashya, Harabi Shimon Hachbana. That's not a problem. This is a distinction between Rabbi Shimon and the rabbis. Okay, Rabbi Shimon, we're going to see one of them holds libun is a shinui, one of them holds libun is not a shinui. How so? Where do we see this? And their argument is actually in the topic of Reshit Hagez, the first shearings that you give to the Kohen. Ditanya, gazizot va'ova argo ein mitztaref. Let's say you took, here come the numbers. You took, let's say, three rechelim, and you started shearing them, you spun the wool from them, or you embroidered with them. Okay, you did some sort of action to it. Ein mitzdaref. Then, if you took 2 or 3 and there were still another 2, but you kind of already took the shearings from there. You hadn't sheared the others yet. And then you already did a shinui with those before you got to the other 2. Well, they don't join together because you don't view that as 5 because you already changed part of them. But libno, what if you only whiten first batch? Then would they join together or not? So Rabbi Shimon Omer ein mitzdaref. Rabbi Shimon says these do not join together. Okay, because you already did a change to it. What do you see here? Libun is a shinui, according to Rabbi Shimon. Chachamim Omer mitzdaref. Chachamim saying no, whitening, that's not a change. They would combine with all the others. So how do we explain? In other words, again, let's go back to the contradiction. We had the Mishna, which is actually in Chulin about Reshit Gez, which said, libno, if you whiten them, that you wouldn't be obligated, right? Libno v'lo tziv'o, you would be obligated. That wouldn't be a change. You would still be obligated. That goes like the rabbis. The libun is not a change. And our braita, which said basically libnan, right? Mishalem kashad gzela. Once you whiten it, that's already a change, and then it means the payment is based on the original amount. That would be according to Rabbi Shimon. So that's a way to resolve the contradiction. But now we're going to have 2 other ways to resolve the contradiction. Rava Amar Hava Rabbi Shimon. You could say they're both Rabbi Shimon. Libun in general is a shinui, but what? Lo kashya ha dinaptse niputse ha disarke siluke. Libun really is a shinui, but when they talked in the Mishna there, in Mishna Chulin, and said libnovelotziv, oh, you're still liable, it would be where you did a combing of it to clean it out. There was more by hand. That's naptse niputse. You just did a combing by hand. That doesn't really clean it out. That's not a serious change. When you did the sarke siluke, you did a serious combing with a proper comb, that's already a proper cleaning, and that's going to be a shinui. So it depends how you did it. That's option 2. Rabbi Shiur bar Avanamal had chavre chavure, had kabre kavruye. Again, a difference in the process. Here we're talking not about the combing part of it, but when you whiten it. Once you cleaned it out with water, like something you just whitened it, chavre chivure, okay, you cleaned it out with water, let's say. And kavre kavruye is where you use sulfur to really bleach it. That's a different process that really changes it. If you're just cleaning it out, that's not really a change. Okay, so we had the first option to say it's a difference in approach, 2 different opinions about is libun a change or is it not? Alternatively, you could say they all think libun is a change, but only if you do it in a serious manner. And that depended on either the difference in the combing or the difference in the washing, the cleaning, or the bleaching process, I would say. Okay, next, still continuing along this line. Hashta yesh lomar, tzevel Rabbi Shimon lo havi shinui, libun havi shinui. Now we're going to say, wait, we have a bit of a problem because what happened before? We said that Rabbi Shimon matches this braita. The braita had said, Semer v'libnan mishalem kashad gzela, right? If you have wool and you whiten it, that's a change. And we had earlier, there was the Mishna that said, lo hispik litno ad shetzva'o, right? I'm sorry, one second. Right. So this other braita said, if you didn't yet color it, then for sure you're exempt. Okay? Because you'd be exempt because, if you colored it, then you'd be exempt because if you didn't give it to the Kohen and you already colored it, that's a change. But libno v'lo chayav. But if you did the libun, the whitening without coloring, then you'd still be obligated because libun isn't a change, but seva is. What's clear from there is that if you have it on a scale, seva is obviously more change than libun. So now, according to Rabbi Shimon, who thinks that even libun is a change, obviously coloring it would be a change. That is going to raise a problem with something else Rabbi Shimon says. So that's what we said here. Okay, now, seva, we're going to see, according to Rabbi Shimon, is not a shinui. But libun have a shinui, that doesn't make any sense. The Mishnah we saw in Chulin goes the exact opposite. Seva is more of a change than libun. And Rabbi Shimon, who says libun is a change, should for sure think that seva is a change, but he doesn't say that. And here we're going to see, Tanya. Gazaz rishon utzvah. If you shear one, and then another one, and then another one at a time, you're not going to be liable. Right? If you color, so you gazaz rishon and then colored. Rishon utva'aho, rishon va'argo, ein mitzdaref. Okay, so if you shear one and then you color it. You shear one and then you spin it into wool. You shear one and then you embroider with it. You're not going to combine these. Okay, those are all shinuyim according to Kamma. Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda Omer Mishum Rabbi Shimon. Now here's a different Rabbi Shimon quoting our Rabbi Shimon. Says tzva'o mitztaref. If you color it, it is going to combine because coloring is not a change. So now we're stuck. He thinks liable is a change, but that's something coloring is. Coloring, as we showed from the Mishna before, in the Mishna included, coloring is for sure a change. Liable was the question. So Amar Abai lo kashya. Rabbanit liable to Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon liable to Rabbi Shimon. Okay, we're going to basically say we're going to have two ways to resolve this contradiction. One is to say, okay, one is Abai says, oh, very simply, this is Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda quoting Rabbi Shimon. He thinks Seva is not a shinui, and obviously then liable wouldn't be a shinui. And when we quoted Rabbi Shimon before in the braita, that was the Rabbi Shimon who a different view of what Rabbi Shimon held. It's the same Rabbi Shimon. It's just two different opinions what he held. One is Rabbi Shimon Yehuda's opinion about it, and one is the regular opinion about it, which is the liable is a shinui according to him. And that's one way to resolve the contradiction. Rava brings a different resolution. Lo pligi Rabbanan Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda. Really, the rabbis don't agree with Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda. Okay, there really is one opinion of Rabbi Shimon. But what are we going to say now? Our assumption before that we tried to infer before was that Seva is definitely a change. Libun was more of the question, and that if you say Libun is a change, then of course you're going to think that Seva is a change. No. Shani Seva ho'il v'yachol aviro al yedei tzfon. So you can undo dye, okay? Depends on the dye. So now they're going to say this saffron, which you can use as a material. How do you say it? Like almost like a cleansing material, which can undo dye. Now, what about that source that said everybody held that once you color it, of course it's a change, and of course you're now not going to have to give it to the Kohen anymore? That was Bekala Ilan to Lo Avar. In other words, we're going to have different types of dyes. Some kind of dyes can be removed and some kind of dyes can't. So if you have a scale now, you're going to have dyes that can be undone. That's going to be something that we don't view as a change. That's the source we saw before. Rabbi Shimon says, Ben Yehuda says in the name of Rabbi Shimon that it would be combined. Then we have libun, which is whitening, which Rabbi Shimon thinks is a change. And then we have coloring, which everyone agrees is going to be a change. That's if you use kala ilan, which is a type of dye that doesn't get undone. And then we resolve the contradiction by saying, depends on what kind of coloring we're talking about. Okay, the last thing for today. Amar Abai, Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda Beit Shammai, Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov, Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, Rabbi Yishmael, Kulu Sfiru Shino b'mkomo omed. We're now going to see a whole list of rabbis, and we're only going to start this today, who all hold that shinui doesn't really make a change, okay? A shinui, something that some people, now, it doesn't mean that shinui isn't kona at all, but they hold, if you're going on the scale of, how much a shinui can change things, if there's a shinui that's somewhat controversial, is it really a shinui or not? They're going to hold it's not really a shinui. And there's going to be a scale, a range here of different opinions, but they're all going to be very lenient or, loose about how they define, I don't know how you would say it, maybe more strict, you would say, about what is actually considered a shinui that's going to mean it's acquired, let's say, by the thief, or in other situations where shinui causes some sort of acquiring, which is important for all sorts of halachic issues. So let's start. Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda Hadamaran. So the first one is Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda. That's what we just said, because he basically said that even seva is going to be mitzdaref. Even seva doesn't change it. So if you color the wool of one of the sheep and then you shear more sheep, we're going to combine them all together and give it to the Kohen, because that shinui didn't make a change at all. Beit Shammai, Maihi. What's the Beit Shammai opinion? Titania, Natan machitim be'ednan avas ansola. We learned this not so long ago. If you gave wheat as a gift to a prostitute, and then she turned them into fine flour, or zaitim basan shem, and you gave her olives and she turned it into oil, or anavim basan yayin, or you gave her grapes and she turned them into wine. Tanechada asul v'tanya idach mutal. One braita said it's forbidden to use on and to bring as a sacrifice, and one said it's permitted. Farber of Yosef. Tani Gurian Demas Borek, Beit Shammai Oslim Beit Hillel Matilim. So what do you see? Or Beit Shammai is the one who forbids it because they don't view this as a shinui enough. It's still considered a gift given to a prostitute. Whereas Beit Hillel views this already as a shinui. So that's how Beit Shammai goes in the same camp as Rav Shimon ben Yehuda, and we're going to see all the other opinions tomorrow. So what we did on the second half of the daf was we started with the topic of shinui, of change, and how change causes something to be acquired by the thief. And then, right, we talked about different kinds of changes, and then we had a whole debate. Can we infer something from the Mishnah or not, right? If we infer from the Mishnah just this case, but not sanding or that, then that contradicts another source. So we had to resolve that. We had two different ways to resolve it. Then we went to, that led us to another contradiction, which led to another contradiction, right? Where we brought in the Reshit HaGez and changes in that kind of area and using the same terminology of the whitening and the coloring and all that till we got to our resolutions to how we resolve the different contradictions and what each one's talking about, or perhaps their different approaches. And then from the different approaches, we got to this last line about, well, this different approach that we saw now in the name of Rabbi Shimon Yehuda, that matches a different approach, right, that we see across the board in a whole bunch of other sugyot. With that, we'll finish for today, and wishing everybody a Shabbat Shalom and a Shavua Tov.